There is a moment in the life of a city that never truly sleeps, when even the neon seems to remember how to be gentle. Lamps breathe a softer light, taxis slow as if to listen. It was in one of those after-hours pockets that word came, not as a headline, not as a telegram, but carried in the way a street vendor stopped mid-call and the television in a half-open window fell silent. The name that fell into the silence belonged to a young man who had only ever seemed invincible on screen. Yu Meng. In another life, on another stage, he had been called many things: the rebel, the tender leader, the boy with the laugh that split through tense silences like sunlight. He was everything a young star could be: bright, unafraid, reckless in charm. To audiences, he was a story. To those who'd been close, he was a collection of fragile, stubborn moments stitched together. Coffee shared in the midnight green room, a torn script with margin notes, a song hummed off-key to fill a lull. This is the story of the night a legend remembered him, the night Tony Liang, a man who'd spent decades learning the art of restraint, let a memory unfold like paper in a gentle wind. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story to keep the light burning for truth and compassion. Tony Liang had never been good at calling. They said the great ones kept a distance to keep the illusion intact. He had been that distance. The public knew his grace, his near-balletic control of expression. The private world, those few rooms where he laughed without timing it for the camera, existed in quieter catalogs. A bowl of late-night noodles left half-eaten, a pair of theater tickets never used, a crate of letters bound by a ribbon that had been waiting for rain. The envelope appeared on his doorstep with no return address, only a handwriting his mind recognized by the cadence of a shared script. When he opened it, the paper trembled in his hands, as though the letter had been carrying its own heartbeat. Tony sunbeamed him. It began, in the plain, urgent way young people speak when every word must be used before time runs out. I will not call you a legend, because you will tell me not to. I will only say thank you. For the cups of tea you forced me to drink, for the way you taught me to stand still when the camera lies, for the time you showed me a rehearsal I had never watched. There is one thing I regret. I never told you how much I wanted to learn to be as calm as you. I wanted to learn how to be brave in silence.
Meng.
Tony read it twice, 3 times. He placed the paper beneath a folded pair of gloves and went to his study window. Outside, the city breathed. Inside, the letter seemed to enlarge the room around it. If there is a kind of grief that arrives not with drama, but with an accretion of small, private things, the tatters of a rehearsal jacket, the way a laugh once echoed in a corridor, Tony felt that grief now. It was less like Shoreline's meeting. It was the erosion of a path you used to take every morning but never noticed until it was closed. Flashbacks in KDrama are not merely memory. They are confession. In one such confession, Tony remembered the first time he'd seen Yu Meng move across a stage. It was an early rehearsal for a period film. Lots of silk, smoke, and very serious eyebrows. The director had stopped and frowned. The younger actor had tilted his head as if listening to a secret the set had whispered. Tony had been watching from the shadows, cup of tea warming 2 cold palms. The boy's hands were always in motion, arranging, rearranging, a nervous choreographer of small, telling gestures. When the director called for a cut, the rest of the cast drifted away like heat, but Tony watched as Yu Meng walked to the props table and, with the reverence of a boy placing flowers, smoothed the petal of a fake blossom until it lay obedient and patient. That is a man who understands the unspoken, Tony had muttered to himself, a quiet verdict. It was the sort of thing older actors notice, an instinct for the detail that anchors deception and makes it feel like truth. That day, Tony offered to teach the boy silence. Not the absence of sound, but the discipline of listening as a part of acting. Their lessons were unspectacular, the sort that build monuments out of repetition. Tony showed him how to hold a cup, so it looked like he'd held it all his life, how to let an eyebrow do the work of a paragraph. In return, Yu Meng gave Tony a lesson in forgetting the self, how to laugh suddenly when the moment was not his, and how to make a room feel lighter without throwing a single line away. The city held its River Lantern Festival the week Yu Meng died. Candles moved like small, obedient stars on the dark skin of water. People came to release wishes into the current. They came to believe in the illusion that each floating flame could carry away a regret. Tony stood among them, wrapped in a coat his grandmother might have approved of, watching the lanterns bob away until they were no more than glints on a black page. From time to time, fans would whisper his name, and he would incline his head, the polite tilt of a man who knows applause is someone else's work to do. A young woman approached him, eyes swollen but face composed. In her hands, folded like a secret, was a scrap of paper. "He left this," she said, and Tony felt as if the world had rearranged its furniture. It was Yu Meng's handwriting, a line of directions, a place, a time. "For you," she added. "In case you ever wanted to know." He read a single sentence and felt the city tilt. "If you ever find that the world is too loud, go to the old theater on Moon Alley at midnight. There is a song there for you. There are certain invitations that are less summons than prayers." Tony went because what else was there? The old theater smelt of dust and spent dreams, a place where the planks still remembered the weight of applause. When he opened the creaking door, the stage was empty save for a single sheet of music on a stand, a candle guttering beside it. He played the melody. It was a simple thing, a lullaby transformed into an elegy. Every note folded itself into memory, like a letter sealed with a lover's hand. He felt a warmth on his shoulder and turned, only to find the seat beside him empty and the door accepting the night. If this were a confession scene in a drama, Tony would have told us then about the fights, petty, human things you do when you live in the orbit of celebrities. He would have told us about a missed call, a rehearsal skipped for an interview, a harsh word thrown in the glow of spotlighted vanity. But the truth, like good drama, lives in that space where admission makes the silence heavier. Tony began to assemble the little facts that make up regret. The rehearsal he'd asked Yu Meng to skip, telling him to rest. The text message he'd left unread because he'd been rehearsing a smile for a photo. These were not grand betrayals, just the tiny omissions that make a life feel unfinished when someone else leaves. He found himself at the corner cafe, where the younger actor had once spilled coffee on a script and laughed about it like a small, triumphant rebellion. The barista, a girl who had always thought of the two of them as a comedy duo in a world that never wrote their punchlines, handed Tony an envelope. "He knew you'd come," she said. Inside were Polaroids. Tony and Yu Meng caught mid-argument with furrowed brows. Tony teaching the boy to light a cigarette like an actor from the old movies, Yu Meng asleep on a couch with an award taped to his chest like a rebel with honors. There was also an audio file. Tony had to press play twice before the voice, young, unguarded, filled the small space. "I am afraid of being ordinary," Yu Meng's voice said, then laughed. "But, Tony Sunbeam, you taught me how to be brave enough to be ordinary when it's honest. Don't worry about me. Go act like the chivalrous old man you are." Tony listened to the laugh and felt, abruptly, a laughter that belonged to somebody else. He wanted to be angry at the boy for leaving, for the cruelty of absence, but he only felt a tenderness so large it was almost unbearable. Of course the press came. The city loved a narrative and always wanted its icons to deliver a line that would fold neatly into columns and captions. Cameras leaned like curious flowers. Microphones leaned in, as if feeding on grief. Tony walked into that room with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who knew what silence owed to dignity. He did not read a prepared statement. Instead, he closed his eyes and told a story, not the one the press wanted, but a small human truth. "I remember him as someone who would hide his fear in jokes," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of decades. "We all have those things we do to survive. The way we practice a smile, how we rehearse grief until it looks natural." Meng never practiced the quiet he should have been allowed to have. He wanted to learn to be still. "He is teaching me now." Reporters wrote it down. The cameras caught a hand rubbing the bridge of his nose. The world prepared sentences for him. He refused to make his grief consumable. He refused to be headline-ready. Instead, in that room tiled with light and lenses, he offered a small, intimate memory. The way Yu Meng folded the corner of a script as if bookmarking a secret, the way he once fell asleep with his head on Tony's shoulder and woke with a start, whispering an apology for snoring. It was not sensational. It did not sell. It was, however, an honest thing, and in honesty there is a kind of grace that even tabloids can respect in their quieter hours. After the press, rumors went where rumors always go, into the town squares of comment sections, into late-night talk shows that stitched grief into narrative for ratings. Tony could have let it all take shape without him. He could have appointed spokespeople, drafted bulletins. Instead, he went on a pilgrimage of small places that had once been their shared backlit. He visited the places where youth had been spent, the old noodle shop that gave them a free bowl after a bad audition, the rehearsal space that smelled of linoleum and determination, the balcony where they had once watched the city light itself on fire and promised not to become what they'd become. At each place, someone would produce something Yu Meng had left behind, a jacket with a cigarette burn, a tape of a rehearsal where his voice caught on a line he never quite delivered. People offered these relics not for commerce but for consolation, an offering in the form of memory. In that way, Tony assembled a mosaic of a man, not the headlines that had tried to define him, but the small human gestures that made him three-dimensional, the way he helped a street vendor carry heavy boxes, the practice of writing candy wrappers into his scripts like confetti, the way he would insist on paying for everyone's taxi. There is a cinema somewhere between memory and myth where film reels spool like a slow heartbeat. People say that Yu Meng left a final performance tucked into a film that never premiered, a reel that shows him alone in a room, pretending to be other people because being himself was a work in progress. Tony was invited, unofficially, to watch the reel with a handful of other actors who had known the boy. They sat in a small theater where the curtains smelled of dust and reputation. The projection hummed. The light cut a slow lane across the room. For 90 minutes, the world watched a life unspool in images. Yu Meng as a street kid, as a lover, as a father in a film that would never see daylight. In one scene, unadorned and raw, he sat by a window and hummed a melody only he seemed to remember. The camera did not dramatize his face. It simply loved the way he blinked. When the light dimmed, no one applauded. They did not know whether to grieve or to celebrate a performance gifted to the living. Tony left the theater with the reel tucked under his arm like contraband. He felt as if the boy had left him a map, a series of stills showing how to walk again. The city eventually forgave the spectacle. It never entirely forgave itself. People returned to their routines. Actors took odd jobs to fill the holes left. Fans created makeshift shrines on tiny blocks of pavement. In the middle of it all, Tony staged a quiet exhibition. Portraits of Yu Meng painted by friends, scripts with marginalia, a single empty director's chair with a reserve sign. He stood beside the chair and spoke into an empty microphone, not looking for image or sympathy, but to test the sound of his own voice. He told stories of a boy who had once trembled like an animal under strobe lights, of a man who learned to make his fear look like conviction. He laughed, the old laugh that had always signaled the end of rehearsal, and then, for the first time in many years, he cried openly in public. It was not theatrical weeping. It was the weeping of someone who had waited too long to say what mattered. A child in the corner raised a small paper lantern and set it on a table. Other people followed. The room lit itself in a constellation of tiny flames. There is a lesson older actors try to teach younger ones. Fame is a comfortable lie. Art is the uncomfortable truth you tell yourself every day. Tony had always given the lesson in clipped aphorisms and wry smiles. That night, he taught it in the only way he could, with a story of loss that wore no makeup. Do not wait to say the things that matter, he told the crowd and the city beyond. Do not let your silence build monuments no one can visit. Learn to be brave in the small rooms. Learn to hold a cup in a way that lets the world believe you have always done so. He left the theater and walked out into the rain. The city washed itself in clear water. Neon ran like tears. Far away, someone set a lantern on the water, and for a second it floated as if nothing in the world could obliterate it. Tony Liang climbed the steps to his apartment and found a final postcard tucked under his door. It read, "Don't forget to practice stillness." I'll be learning next to the stars.
Meng.
He pressed the paper to his heart and realized, with a clarity that felt almost cruel in its tenderness, that learning to grieve is part of learning to live. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story to keep the light burning for truth and compassion.